Hey, what's up everyone? I'm Dave Meyer, the Vice President of Data and Analytics here at BiggerPockets, and today we're going to talk about 3 indicators that are showing a very strong, fundamentally sound housing market that is likely to continue these crazy home price appreciation trends that we have seen over the last couple of years. Before we get started and into this, please make sure to like this video, give us a thumbs up, and subscribe to the BiggerPockets YouTube channel so you can keep getting videos just like this. All right, let's jump into it with our first news story this week, which is that lumber prices have come down to under $1,000 per 1,000 board feet, down from over $1,700 in May. And to be clear, this drop is great news. It's dropped about 42%, but we are still about twice as high as what we would expect this type of year. So we are seeing prices come down, but we should expect them to stay relatively high, at least for the foreseeable future. And that's because home builders are struggling to keep up with demand. There is data that shows that the United States needs to build 3.8 million homes to meet demand. So that means that home builders are going to keep buying lumber and building as quickly as they can, and that's going to keep prices of lumber really high. While that is still going to happen and prices are going to be passed along to buyers, this news will probably help the housing market in 2 ways. First, we'll see that lower costs should encourage more home building. Like I just said, there's all these homes that we need to build as a country to meet demand. But when lumber prices are so high, a lot of builders just don't want to build because it's so expensive and it's not really profitable for them. So with prices coming back down, hopefully more builders will get into the game. And secondly, it should help cool off the housing market to a more sustainable level. I'm not saying that's going to crash or prices are going to come down. I'm just saying that builders tend to pass the increased cost of more lumber on to buyers, and when lumber comes down, the amount that they pass on to buyers will be a little bit less. So hopefully that will slow down these run-up of prices that we have seen for so long. The second story I want to talk about is that credit standards are loosening a little bit. And when I talk about credit standards, I mean how qualified a borrower is to get a house. And this obviously matters for a lot of reasons. And as most of you remember, in the run-up to 2007, when we had this huge financial crash and housing prices dropped for so long, a lot of it was fueled by subprime mortgages. And what that means is that lenders were basically giving money away to people who were not really qualified to buy homes. So one thing I really like to watch is these credit standards and see if something's changing. And the good news for the housing market over the long term is that it's not. We are seeing credit standards starting to loosen, but we are absolutely nowhere near where we were before the pandemic or where we were in 2007. There were a lot of laws put in place after the financial crisis that prevented lenders from making these really risky loans, and we're seeing that hold true. What happened, just for context, so you can understand the news that's coming out about this, is that there is something called the Mortgage Availability Credit Index that's put out by the Mortgage Bankers Association. And that basically measures how tight or loose credit standards are. So the higher the number of the index, the looser the credit standards. Before the pandemic, we were at about a 180, which is relatively high, but still pretty safe considering we weren't seeing any subprime mortgages then. At the beginning of the pandemic, when people were panicked and didn't know what was going to happen, credit availability tanked. It went down to about 120. Where we are right now is 128. So we've barely started to come back of the baseline of where it plunged to after the beginning of the pandemic. And we are absolutely nowhere near the 180 that we were at before the pandemic. So we are seeing credit loosening, and you should expect to hear that continue to happen as the economic news gets better. But don't be afraid that all of a sudden people are making irresponsible loans. For the most part, all the data shows that people who are buying these extremely expensive houses, and even the people who are buying as prices continue to increase, all data indicates that these people, these buyers, can afford the mortgages that they are taking out. For our last story this week, I will let you know that for the 15th consecutive week, mortgages in forbearance have dropped. And for me, I think that's really good news, first and foremost, because I hope people can stay in their houses and don't get foreclosed on. But it's also pretty good for the housing market. because there is much less risk of a foreclosure crisis if forbearance program goes well. Just for some context, when at the beginning of the pandemic, the government basically said that mortgagees could not be foreclosed upon for at least 15 months for government-backed loans. Those 15 months are coming up at the end of June, so it'll be really interesting to pay attention. And the reason I think it's good for the housing market that forbearances are going down is because fewer and fewer people are at risk of foreclosure. And I know there are people out there who think, oh, if we had more foreclosures, we'd have more inventory on the market and that would cool down the market. And there is some logic to that, but if you look at the data, it does not suggest that foreclosures would actually fix the problem, and it could cause all of these ripple effects through the economy and negative social and economic consequences that are not going to help anyone out. So to me, seeing more and more loans go exit foreclosure and in good standing, and the data shows that about 85% of borrowers who exit foreclosure are in good standing, is a really positive trend going into the end of the forbearance program. But you should really pay attention to what happens through July because honestly, we don't really know what's going on with the remaining 2 million loans that are in forbearance. Are 85% of them going to exit forbearance in good standing like the data we've seen so far? Or are these 2 million loans potentially the higher risk one and we are going to see an increase in foreclosures? So definitely something to pay attention to. But for now, let me just recap by saying something that I've said for a while. I think that the housing market is going to continue this run-up in prices at least for the next 6 to 12 months. And the data that we've talked about today just confirms that. With lumber prices coming back down, more home buyers are going to continue building, and it's not likely to lead to this unsustainable growth that would cause a crash. Secondly, while we are seeing credit loosening up, we are absolutely nowhere near where we were before the pandemic or in 2007. And so it is unlikely that there are subprime loans that are going to cause the market to crash. And lastly, we are unlikely to see a huge flood in foreclosures that are going to cause the market to crash. Some of the greatest fears that have been going through the market that could contribute to a crash: crazy building costs, loose credit, and high number of homes in foreclosure, I just don't see them coming. All the data shows actually the opposite. So to me, I think that the housing prices are going to continue to go up, but would love to hear what you all think in the comments below. That's it for me. I'm Dave Meyer with BiggerPockets, and I'll see you all next time.